I've been a detective for over a decade, but I'd never seen anything like this. It started on an overcast Tuesday when I was called to a construction site on the outskirts of town. The foreman, a gruff man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, flagged me down as soon as I stepped out of my car. We were digging to lay the foundation, he explained, motioning to the muddy hole in the ground, and we hit this. This was a rusted metal box, about the size of a small cooler, its edges corroded but still intact. It had been sealed tight, and the workers' attempts to pry it open had only managed to scrape off more rust. They decided to call the cops when they noticed the words etched into the lid, "Do not open until 2025. I crouched down to get a closer look.
Who found it?
I asked, glancing up at the foreman. One of my guys. Said it looked like a time capsule or something. Figured you'd want to take a look.
Good call.
We transported the box back to the station, where our forensics team worked to open it without damaging the contents. The whole thing felt surreal, like a relic from a forgotten era. By the time they got it open, half the department was gathered around, eager to see what secrets it held. Inside, we found a collection of objects that could have only come from the 1980s. A Polaroid camera, cassette tapes, yellowed newspaper clippings, and a few handwritten letters. At first glance, it looked harmless, a nostalgic glimpse into someone's youth. But as we sifted through the contents, a darker picture began to emerge. One of the Polaroids showed a wooded area that looked eerily familiar. Another depicted a young woman, smiling nervously at the camera. Something about her expression made my stomach tighten. Then there were the letters, written in a looping script that seemed almost childish. They described mundane events, school dances, summer picnics, but interspersed were cryptic phrases that set off alarms in my head. She screamed louder than I thought she would. "The woods keep secrets well. They'll never find her, not where I put her." I flipped through the pages, my pulse quickening. The handwriting wavered between careful neatness and frenzied scrawls, as though the writer had been fighting to keep control. It didn't take long for us to realize we might be holding evidence of a crime, or crimes. The break in the case came when we traced the time capsule to its creator, a man named Leonard Hargrove. He was in his late 70s now, living alone in a small house cluttered with the detritus of a life lived in isolation. When we showed up at his door, he greeted us with a blank expression, his milky blue eyes darting between me and my partner. "A time capsule," he repeated, scratching his head. "From the 80s, you say?" "That's right," I said, holding up a photo of the box. "Does this look familiar to you?" He squinted at it for a long moment before shaking his head. "Can't say it does. My memory's not what it used to be." "Mr. Hargrove," I pressed, "we found some disturbing things inside.
Letters. Photographs.
They suggest you might have been involved in something serious. Maybe even criminal." His face remained impassive, but I caught the slight tremor in his hands. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly.
"I've never hurt anyone. Never."
As much as I wanted to believe him, the evidence told a different story. The photos matched locations where bodies had been found decades ago, unsolved murders that had haunted this town for years. The letters contained details that had never been released to the public. Either Leonard Hargrove was the world's most unlucky man, or he'd been hiding a terrible secret for over 40 years. "We're going to need you to come down to the station," I said, watching his reaction carefully. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, but then he nodded slowly.
"If you think it'll help," he murmured.
"But I'm telling you, I don't remember any of this." The words were unconvincing, but the look in his eyes gave me pause. There was no defiance, no attempt to deny or deflect. Just a quiet, aching confusion that made me wonder if he was telling the truth. And if he was, what did that mean for the case, and for the victims who still waited for justice? At the station, Hargrove sat in the interrogation room, hunched over the table, his trembling hands clasped in front of him. My partner, Detective Martinez, and I watched him through the one-way glass. "He's either the best actor I've ever seen," Martinez muttered, "or he genuinely doesn't know what's going on." "I'm leaning toward the latter," I admitted. "But the evidence says otherwise. Those letters, the details. No one else could have written them." We entered the room and took our seats across from Hargrove. I slid one of the Polaroids across the table, the one of the wooded area. "Do you recognize this spot?" Hargrove stared at it, his brow furrowing. For a moment, his lips moved as though he was speaking silently to himself. Finally, he shook his head. "Looks like the woods near my childhood home, but it's been years. Decades." "What about her?" I pushed the photo of the young woman across the table. Her nervous smile seemed to weigh heavily on the room. "Do you remember her?" He leaned in closer, squinting at the image. His face paled, and his breathing grew shallow. She looks familiar, but I can't place her." "Who is she?" "We were hoping you could tell us," Martinez said. Her body was found in those woods in 1987. You don't remember her name? Anything about her? Hargrove's hands flew to his temples, and he shook his head violently.
No. I don't remember.
Please, I'm not lying. I swear it. There was something raw and desperate in his voice that made me hesitate. Could this really be a case of repressed memories? Or was it an elaborate act? We switched gears, presenting the letters. The handwriting analysis confirmed they were his, but when we slid them toward him, his reaction was unexpected. His eyes widened, and he recoiled as though the pages were poisonous.
No. No.
I didn't write those. I couldn't have.
But you did, I said softly.
The handwriting matches yours, Mr. Hargrove. These are your words. He stared at the letters as tears welled in his eyes.
They're mine, but they're not me, he whispered.
I don't know how to explain it, but I didn't write these, not in my right mind. What does that mean? Martinez asked, her voice edged with frustration. You're saying someone forced you? Or are you claiming you were possessed? Hargrove's gaze darted between us, panic flickering behind his milky eyes. Then, almost inaudibly, he muttered, I've been sick.
For a long time.
That caught my attention. What kind of sickness? He hesitated, his hands shaking so violently he had to clasp them together again. The doctors said it was dissociative something. Dissociative identity disorder.
I've had blackouts.
Gaps in my memory. Sometimes I'd lose days, weeks even. But I never thought, he broke off, his voice cracking. I never thought I could have done something like this. Martinez and I exchanged a glance. It wasn't impossible, but it also wasn't a common diagnosis. It would explain his confusion and the apparent disconnect between him and the letters. But it wouldn't exonerate him, not with the evidence piling up. We decided to dig deeper, requesting his medical records and a full psychological evaluation. Meanwhile, we searched his property, hoping to find something, anything, that could either confirm or disprove his claims. What we found in his basement left little room for doubt. Behind a false wall, we discovered a collection of artifacts eerily similar to those in the time capsule. More Polaroids, more letters, even a cassette tape labeled Confession. When we played it back at the station, the voice was unmistakably Hargrove's, though it sounded younger, angrier, and filled with an unsettling glee. She begged me to let her go, the voice on the tape said, laughing bitterly. But the woods don't forgive. And neither do I. Hargrove was brought back into the interrogation room, where we confronted him with the tape. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but his words only deepened the mystery. That's my voice, but it's not me.
It's him. The other one.
It was the kind of case that would haunt me long after it was closed. In the end, Hargrove was charged with multiple counts of murder, but whether he truly remembered committing the crimes remained a question mark. The psychologists believed his alternate personality, a darker, fragmented part of himself, had taken control during the killings. Justice was served, but it was cold comfort for the victims' families, and for me. I'd been a detective for over a decade, but this case forced me to confront something I'd never truly believed in. The idea that sometimes the greatest mysteries lie not in the evidence we uncover but in the human mind itself.